Morning, guys. On Colossians chapter 4, reading from verse 7. As to all my affairs, Tychicus, our beloved brother and faithful servant and fellow bondservant in the Lord, will bring you information. And verse 8, for I have sent him to you for this very purpose, that you may know about our circumstances and that he may encourage your hearts. So we're looking at this guy Tychicus, and he was a Gentile, a fellow believer, a fellow companion of Paul's, and he was used greatly as would be a postal delivery or a postman. In those days there's no postal service, and so he would take the letters for Paul, mentioned in a couple of different letters. And as Paul says here, beloved brother and faithful servant and fellow bondservant. And so that first word, servant, diakonos, where we get the word deacon, and fellow bondservant, the word servant there, doulos, where we get the word slave, or in this context, co-slave. And so he is a servant and a slave of Jesus Christ, and also a servant of God. And that's also terms used for us as believers. We're called by God to serve. We're called and bought at a price, purchased by Jesus, and so we are slaves in that sense. We are owned by him, but we've also been called to diakonos, to serve others. And here's a wonderful example of Tychicus, who faithfully served and traveled all those distances between Paul and the churches. And it goes on to say in verse 8, I have sent him to you for this very purpose, that you may know about our circumstances. And so it's important that we know what's going on in each other's life. It's important that we're encouraged. There may be needs that we need to pray for, or needs that we need to provide for, but people aren't going to know unless you speak to them. Sometimes we get a little bit prideful. We don't want to, or we feel ashamed. We don't want to say things about our problems, or we just want to keep quiet. We feel like it's not going to serve much purpose telling others, and so we become quite insulated and isolated in our Christian walk. But it's important that we share with one another, and it's important that we let each other know what's going on. In fact, there's quite a few verses that talk about us sharing testimonies and encouraging one another. Mark 5 verse 19 says, go home to your own people and tell them how much the Lord has done for you and how he has had mercy on you. Psalm 145 verse 4, one generation shall praise your works to another and shall declare your mighty acts. And so as God blesses you, as God encourages you, share that and encourage others to do likewise. Acts 4 verse 20, for we cannot help speaking about what we have seen and heard. And it should be something that's bubbling over. We should be joyfully telling others of how God is working, and also what our needs are. And so it says they're twofold in verse 8. First of all, so we can inform. Tychicus was there to inform what's happening in Paul's life, but also it says in order that he may encourage our hearts. And so by letting people know what's happening, we encourage one another. So as we hear of Paul, we hear about his contentment in prison and his joyfulness. We hear that the gospel is still going out even though he's locked in prison. We rejoice that God is still building his church, even though it may look like he's locked up and the church is not growing. And so when we hear of these wonderful testimonies in each other's lives, we are encouraged. And so don't be shy today to encourage someone else. Let people know how God is working in your own life and what he's been doing, and just share the love of Christ with everyone. God bless.